the European Court of Justice. Those are 2009 case studies. And then we may be able to talk about it. Obviously, the scorecard process is one that tells you what tool was used in a specific impact assessment. So if that is your question, you can already answer by looking at the scorecards, like the one produced by Robert Hahn and here in Europe by Andrea Renda and Lorna Schreffler. That's something you can already say yes or no. The case study would tell you why, when, what is the, you can use variables and say, well, how about the sector, for example? How about political interest? How about the role of the central unit? So you can run multivariate and bivariate analysis that you cannot really, unless you are a true believer in your yes, no, scores, do with a simple scorecard. So we don't have the answer yet because the cases we have so far, maybe Liaise wants to do some more cases, we'll do some cases, are very much on the 2004, 2006, something 7 period. We need a longer timeline to answer that.
I have a question. You talked about the value added of a sectoral approach to impact assessment, which is somehow a common denominator across countries, and it could be. So how does this apply to issues such as climate change or biodiversity, which really require a sort of integrated impact assessment across sectors? So do you have in mind a model which, abstracting from the macro level, which is very hard to achieve in reality, and we see how the negotiation process is going on, do you have in mind a model which could better apply to such cross-sectoral impacting issues?
Yes, another useful question for us. I think that the way we define the boundaries of our research is subjective but active, but created with some reasonable and explicit criteria. So one way of saying that we're looking at the sector, a sector like transport, is to say that we think there are problems that are transport problems, and these problems act as catalyst of a group of actors that interact around the transport problems. There is nothing wrong in saying, well, there is a new meta sector, which is climate change, which is not really about transport or about energy production. It is all of that and something else. The first question would be, in a country like Italy, for example, is there a policy community that revolves around climate change? Is there a sector as such, in terms of policy officers, not in terms of researchers, in terms of stakeholders, in terms of ministries preparing plans and then checking on the plans, and then understand how that community, if it exists, has negotiated what impact assessment is to do for them and what the tools are to do for them. So I think when I say sector, the sector can be also a complex one, a meta-level sector like climate change. My polemical note was on some of the work I have myself done. So there's, the sinners are the best to talk about their own sins. Of saying, okay, because I know that, let's say, the Austrian political system is federal with a chance in this parliament, then I can predict a lot about lawmaking, and impact assessment is part of lawmaking, so it's going to be the same across sectors. I think there is more to, I guess you don't have this problem because you are inside the sector, but typically when you start doing the country reports, we, I think, tend to put too much emphasis on hard institutional variables. Okay, so whereas we know there is a lot of variation, also at the different levels, like your work on Sweden with Måns Nilsson shows very well that it depends if we look at the committees of inquiry or if we look at the agencies. Those are two levels, they do impact assessment, but in a different way, and the only thing you can take from the Swedish macro-institutional setting is the constitutional autonomy of agencies. Yes, that has an effect, but only in the sense of alerting you on the difference. So I think climate change is great. the question is that in some countries, I'm not sure it is as yet recognized as a problem by a policy community that revolves around that problem and not other problems. It sometimes uses impact assessment and or climate change as useful labels to describe what they do.
Yeah, I learned from your work and again from your presentation confirmed that this type of positive science is very sensitive in the policy process. We can use for all kinds of means, even for delaying, for exerting control, unintended uses. So, it's not used for problem solving, for achieving sustainability, and so forth. And now you're making the argument the use doesn't depend on the institutional context only. So I'm wondering if you have ideas on perhaps complementary tools, complementary processes or process design, which increases the robustness of positive science in the process without changing the constitution.
Exactly.
Have you any ideas?
Yes. Well, one, I just put it there, and we are not strong believers here. I think one could be the epistemic community's literature that says, well, if the climate change story is plugged into a robust, strong international community of experts with statutory rights of consultation with like an international panel on climate change, with shared ideas about cause and effect, probably that would shape the impact assessment in a sector like that compared to a sector where there is just sheer unpredictability and the problem cannot be tractable. But your question, I think, should be answered by looking exactly at the range of complementary innovations, let's say, or tools, or even legal tools, in which then the impact assessment either finds a space and, like in a puzzle, yes, completes the puzzle and gets the system to work, or doesn't. There is a beautiful thing in your report D13 on Switzerland. Switzerland has an interesting system for lawmaking, right? With consultation that predates everything. A type of obviously legal system with the referendum, with the other assessment. They do a lot of checks on legislation. It's just if you look at the Swiss system of preparing legislation, you don't see the space for the IA. It doesn't really fit. I don't know who did Switzerland here, but you wrote this. And since I was doing a report with Lorenzo Ali on Switzerland on 8 case studies, we found exactly the same that is appended onto a system that has not created space for that. Examples. Giving reasons, requirements. Those are important. Italy does not prescribe that laws have to be motivated. Regulations have to be motivated. Now, if you don't have a giving reason requirements and you start telling officers they have to do a long analysis to justify legislation, they don't understand what they're talking about. They've not been educated by years of giving reason requirements. The other are all the types of checks on unexpected effect, rural proofing, human rights proofing. Some countries are strong on competition analysis. So obviously then you say, well, and now we do an integrated economic analysis. Makes a lot of sense for these systems. Another thing that I think is very useful is a type of implementation of the Freedom of Information Act, when that helps a lot in terms of the need to publicize impact assessment. We know that many countries like the Netherlands, they don't publish that, so why should we do that? Well, probably strong traditions of Freedom of Information Act, transparency, would be complementary to something like, okay, we publish the regulation and the analysis supplementing the regulation. So I think that administrative law and other types of assessments are very, very strong predictor of the